Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to the week that was. Here on Deadline Detroit, I'm Craig Fahle. And as always for this segment, Alan Lengel is here and Nancy Derringer. Thank you very much for joining me this week as we sort of go back through some of the big stories on Deadline this week that people found at DeadlineDetroit.com. And I think the one thing that everybody's sort of paying attention to and that we should start with, because it does have implications for just about everybody in Michigan, with the exception of those of us who aren't driving at the moment, car insurance reform.
Oh, sure.
The state legislature, they were having studies. There were group studies that were going on. They were bringing in all these experts to talk about what reform could be necessary. Then the Republicans just decided, what the heck, let's plow ahead. The Senate passes it in one day. The House takes it up the same day without any committee hearings and passes their own version at 2 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday of this week.
Reason enough to be suspicious of this.
I'm looking at the two packages, though, and as somebody who's been looking at auto insurance reform arguments for 20 years now.
Okay.
And it's the same sticking points we've seen for a long, long time. You know, some of the reforms they're talking about are going to be part of some sort of compromise that comes out of this at the end. So they're about halfway where they need to be. But Governor Whitmer is suggesting that she is going to veto this if it's not exactly what she wants to see. There aren't the votes to override her at this point, I don't think, and certainly not in both houses. So what's going to happen here? Are we just basically going to see the same partisan battles, or are we actually going to see some sort of meaningful reform come out of this?
That's a good question. I'm just very suspicious as to why this legislature suddenly decided that they could take on this enormous issue that is very complicated with many moving parts and fix it in a day. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, it just makes me.
Well, it's not as if
I mean, it's been languishing for this issue's been around for a long time. I mean, the issue is like, can we get enough coverage and still pay a reasonable rate, and can we be guaranteed if we're slashing benefits that we pay less? And I think that was one of the concerns about Democrats, was that here we're going to slash all these health benefits in the package, and the auto insurance is not guaranteeing that it's going to be cheaper rate. And how insane is that?
Well, it's one of the things I pointed out in the podcast this week. I mean, it's a fundamental difference whether or not you believe the market will regulate itself. Because you look at other states that have a different system than Michigan does. Michigan is the only state with unlimited benefits, medical benefits.
Right.
I think the next state is New Jersey, which has a cap of about $500,000 for everybody, and then your health insurance takes over.
Right.
Their rates are a lot different, but most states aren't even close to New Jersey. Now, granted, this is a neat thing here in Michigan, but if you look at the rates in the other states that have made these changes, they are a lot more reasonable.
Right.
So I guess it's a leap of faith to think that these companies will just do this out of the goodness of their heart.
Right. I think it needs to be regulated.
Cynical.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm willing to trust the insurance industry to do the right thing.
We have an insurance agency in Lansing. I mean, it needs to be regulated. I mean, people need to be guaranteed. I mean, the rates of living as a resident of Detroit, when I was living near the stadium, my rate went up from $3,800 to $4,800 for no reason. Nothing had happened. They told me they took away the discount for me. And I changed insurance companies. I also moved to Midtown, and I'm paying far less than half of that right now, which is just I was doing handstands when I was able to do that.
So you took advantage of the zip code.
Yeah.
But it's not unusual. I remember even in Midtown, I accidentally I opened up an insurance statement. I thought it was mine. It was from the person who had lived there before, and it was over $5,000.
Yeah,
and it's like it's insane when your insurance rate is higher than your car note.
Right.
Well, and it's also insane that somebody in the suburbs who's been convicted of driving, under the influence, gets a ticket, pays less in insurance than a single mom in Detroit with a good driving record. These are things that we see happening as well. And so the Democrats are looking to eliminate gender from the equation, zip code, and credit score. The credit score one is something that I think people in the city of Detroit rightfully are ticked off about, because they say, look, I've never gotten a ticket. I'm a good driver. Yeah, I defaulted on a credit card when I was 22 years old, and my credit score stinks, or I lost my house to foreclosure, but I'm still a good driver.
Well, and if you default on if the check for your insurance premium bounces, they just cancel your insurance.
Yes.
It's not like you have an unsecured, like you already bought a bunch of stuff, and that's
there's no repo that has to happen.
Exactly.
Here.
I mean, that makes no sense at all.
When my rate went up to $4,800, I called the insurance with State Farm. And I'd been with them a long time, and I felt they were screwing me. And I said, well, what's the issue here? What are the reasons? And they said, well, I said, is it car theft? Is it that we have so many uninsured motorists? And she said, well, both. And I said, well, what about the person who lives in Royal Oak, works downtown, who's exposed to all those same motorists, who parks downtown, who's exposed to that same issue of car theft? And it's really crazy if you live in the city of Detroit, and you have so many people who are living in the city of Detroit who are using relatives to use their addresses instead of claiming
legal address.
residency.
I mean, how many people can't vote in the city of Detroit because they're registered somewhere else because of the car insurance issue?
Right.
And I talked to an insurance adjuster person that I know about this very thing, and he was talking about the algorithms that they utilize. And it's not based on driving record. It's not based on likelihood of theft. It is based on their algorithm on what your likelihood is of filing a claim or a lawsuit if you were to get into an accident. And it goes up dramatically in the city limits, mostly because there are a number of people that don't have adequate health care coverage to cover this stuff. So everything that they do then goes on their auto insurance due to that accident. So the likelihood that you will file a claim for medical benefits is higher in the city of Detroit, according to this guy.
Okay.
And I've heard these things. It's all about the PIP.
Right, sure.
I mean, this is a big part of it, and there's a reason that there are 800 car hit you billboards everywhere,
right,
and stuff like that. And so,
Which are great billboards.
Well, and so the insurance companies are likely going to freak out if you try to take some of these factors out of their algorithm making process. But at the same time, they don't have as much of a reason to use them if there's a cap on those benefits.
True.
So, for all the howling that you're hearing come from the insurance industry on this one, I hope they'd recognize that that's something that would be addressed if indeed the cap was put on. They should just quietly take what they're getting right now and slink back into their holes. Just a thought.
All right.
Well, no, so we actually
that's where the insurance industry lives.
We have a question from Christian who says, what mechanism do other states use to control "quote unquote" excessive profits by insurance companies? Every state has a regulator for the insurance markets. It's not something that is only in Michigan. They're supposed to actually. It's a consumer advocacy sort of function that they play, making sure that things are not. That they are not tilted in favor of the insurance companies or consumers, frankly. I mean, you see both parties trying to stack that board all the time to get the right people on there to do what they want to do. But there are regulators that are supposed to make sure that things aren't out of whack.
Right.
But anyway, so is this a situation, though, where you see the perfect being the enemy of the good when it comes to reform? Because a couple of Detroit legislators crossed over saying, hey, I got to deliver something for my constituents.
Sure.
If we only get partial, that's better than nothing.
Yeah. It could turn out that way. I don't know. I really would love to see. I'm paying insurance on 3 cars in our family, and I would love to see some significant relief arriving very soon. I'm a little wary of telling people that they can opt out of certain medical coverage because nobody thinks they're going to get hurt in an accident until it actually happens. That was what Brooks Patterson has been beating the drum about for so long. After his near fatal accident, which left his driver, I believe, a quadriplegic and severely injured him. So,
I mean, I personally think that we could see a situation where you keep the catastrophic claims association in place, right? For those cases where somebody is going to need a lifetime of care.
Right.
Everybody else, for most accident victims, that $500,000 cap will cover the vast majority of their costs, if not all of them, or it switches over to their health insurance after some point. Because
if they have health insurance.
Yeah,
if they
well,
have
exactly. Yeah. Well, that's obviously something we need to address in this country as well.
Right.
But it seems that if that was still in place for those people that need like a lifetime of therapy and oftentimes, serious therapy that they're going to be dealing with for the rest of their life, those cases would still be covered. And if that's $200 charge per motorist on top of whatever, but you get rate relief on the other end, it seems like that could be a way to sort of make a compromise. Not a bad idea.
We
and then it would be a case-by-case basis decision that would have to be made, but you could put together a medical board that could figure that out pretty quick.
Cars are safer than ever, too, and fewer people are suffering these kinds of catastrophic, life-changing injuries. Although, if you're on a bicycle and you get hit by somebody on a car, you're kind of out of luck.
Yeah, well, that's
speaking as a cyclist here.
Yes.
So,
well, hey, look, for as much as people complain about the bike lanes in the city of Detroit, they are way better than driving in the middle of one of those lanes because,
God, yes.
It does keep a lot of people out of there. So that's a pretty big deal. All right, let's move on to another subject. I actually think something is going to get done on this. And the auto insurance is important because if you're going to sell people on a gas tax increase, you got to give them something on the other side. I think this is part of the grand bargain that's going to happen.
And really, I mean, nowhere is it more pronounced than in the city of Detroit.
Yeah.
I mean, people sometimes make a decision whether to live in the city based on whether they can afford the car insurance. And that's, I don't think you're seeing that in any other community in Michigan except in Detroit.
Right.
The Illiches are back in the news again this week. I don't think they're ever really going to be out of the news until they actually build the district and start building some housing over there. I think people are going to keep the pedal to the metal on this family and their business
their
interests.
PR better.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Yeah. I spoke to somebody, a business person in the district in that area yesterday, and they're like, they're doing well on business when there's events, but said they're waiting for the rest of the area to develop.
Yeah, they need the neighborhood traffic.
They can't. And guess what? People who are in parking lots, they take off. They don't stick around for, I mean, that area. It's just shameful what's really happened. I mean, that area should have been developed years ago, even before
just look
the stadium
across the street,
was there.
right across Woodward, that whole section that's being built there.
I lived right there on Winder Street.
Yeah,
and that area's been developed for a while.
And there's more coming all the time. That whole
popular,
section of Brush Park is really starting to boom.
It's
It's directly across the street. And if anybody's arguing right now that there's not a market for this kind of stuff here, I've talked to a number of people involved in economic development here in the city, and they say, look, just look across the street. There are investors, there are people that are not necessarily ready to fund everything, but there are people to partner with that want to build this, that they could move forward if they wanted to. So, that's the one thing that I would implore the Illich family to do. Just be upfront about what your ideas are, because at this point, it's time for you to fess up as to what your plans really are for the district.
Yesterday, I was walking home, and I was going by
City Modern.
And here it is. It says condos for sale, $500,000 to $850,000.
Yep.
I worry about how high those prices are. We're not Chicago.
Still cheaper than Chicago.
We don't have Wall Street. We don't have. I just wonder at some point
if it's sustainable.
If it's going to be sustainable or not. I mean, even without a downturn in the market, like where's the balance going to be? Where we're building like $850,000 to live in the city, and the amenities are still lacking. It's not like Chicago, There are still you live on Selden. You live on Selden Street. I mean, you walk around and what are the amenities? You've got Honest John, Selden Standard, and what's the new
She-Wolf. She-Wolf is right there.
But other than that, I mean, it's still a little bit eerie walking around, at night.
And between Jumbos and Honest Johns and Willis,
right?
I could probably.
I think it was about a year ago that I was out to dinner with a group of younger people, and one couple had recently bought a house with a pool in Grosse Pointe Park because they had been priced out of Detroit, and they realized they could get more. They have childless. They had no reason to choose the schools. But they said it was, it just was a better deal. And
I'm sorry, for $850,000, I don't know what you're going to get. Maybe a 3-bedroom condo or something like that, in Detroit. Where in the suburbs, I mean, West Bloomfield, even Grosse Pointe, Bloomfield Hills. I mean, you can get quite
a very nice house.
A lot of house for that.
Exactly.
You can. But then again, think about this, though. Then you're cutting grass, then you're shoveling snow, all that kind of stuff.
What a hardship.
Some of us are looking to get out of right now.
Well, you know what?
I've got a house for sale, everybody, by the way, if anybody wants to buy it.
Well, I mean, look at these condo, besides the condo, I mean, you're talking about condos, $850,000, and that doesn't include condo fees, which can be whatever, $500-$600
they can be.
a month.
Because you got to pay for that health club you never use.
Right. Sure. Exactly.
All right. Well, but the reason that we're talking about the Illiches, they had made an agreement to buy this property from a nonprofit that has been helping homeless people, and it's sort of a throwback to the Cass Corridor days when
it's a homeless crisis center.
Yeah, exactly.
Shelter.
The NSO, Neighborhood Service Organization. They had made an agreement to buy it. NSO was going to move over to Gratiot and Mac, the Gratiot and Mac area. They say they're still going to do it, but the Illiches backed out of buying it, and Nolan Finley, perhaps tongue-in-cheek, who really criticized the Illiches last week about being not exactly open and honest about what they're doing in the district.
The thrill is gone.
Said maybe it's good.
Yeah.
Maybe it's good that they didn't follow through on this offer because it won't be another parking lot.
Yeah, that's what he said. He goes that this improves the chances that whoever does end up buying that space, and I think the NSO was counting on $1.5 million as the sales price, and they were going to use that as seed money to build this new facility on Mack and Gratiot.
Yeah.
And he was the one who said, well, at least now there's a chance that that site might actually be developed. So that's kind of a talk about your backhanded compliment. Not even a compliment. So,
Right.
But they can't get out of their own way right now, though.
No, and part of it is their own fault. I mean, we ran that.
Talk to us. Talk to us.
We ran that.
Best way to do it.
We ran that. We ran a short piece about Denise Illich's appearance on Michigan Matters.
Sure, I watched
where
that
it
on
was
Sunday.
and it was, and they kept. I think Carol Kane asked her twice. She's like, well, they just didn't tell the whole story. And she's like, well, did you make yourselves available to tell your
she
story?
She did say it would have been more balanced had they
said included this stuff. And it's like, well, they tried to talk to you. And
the Illiches are, for all the money they have, they do a terrible job with public relations. It's not that hard to get a good public relations firm or a public relations in-house person who knows what they're doing. But their idea is, we don't need to talk. We don't,
very imperial,
and they pay for it, and they try to threaten news organizations. Thankfully, we don't receive any money from the Illiches. We're not beholden to them, and we will never take money from the Illiches.
I think it's
maybe,
sponsors.
okay, a sponsorship, but no,
well,
I mean, and they've used that with. We know of at least one other publication in town where they've used that sort of threat of you write about us negatively and you aren't going to get ad dollars from us, and that's not the way you do public relations.
Well, you say it's easy enough to find somebody to do it well, but clearly it's not that easy because they're finding a good media relations, public relations person is not that easy to do. We lost a really good one this week in Bob Berg, who, of course, used to be a spokesperson for Bill Milliken, and then Bill Milliken recommended him to Coleman Young to take over as the spokesperson for the city of Detroit. Coleman Young, I think, had gone about 3 years without having somebody in that role. Bob Berg was there through a lot of tough stuff with Coleman Young. A couple of really big scandals. Of course, there was also the scandal involving Chief Hart. And my early days as a reporter, he was still in that position. Coleman Young was still the mayor. And he was a really, really good guy to work with. He didn't always give you exactly what you wanted, but he always tried. And you always got the sense that he was taking your request seriously. And that's really what we can ask as reporters, is that somebody is taking your request seriously and not trying to blow it off.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I always felt Bob was forthright, whether he was a little bit buying the company. I mean, he was very loyal to Coleman Young.
He had a job to do.
And so sometimes, I mean, you had to take something with a little grain of salt. But I never felt it was like Sarah Sanders, where she knows what she's saying isn't true, but that's what the boss wants her to say, or that's what the boss has told her to say. And I never got that sense with Bob that he was just that he was just kind of blowing smoke. But he was just a good guy to deal with. He was an honorable guy, and he was just really a nice person.
You mentioned Sarah Sanders, and this was not on DeadlineDetroit.com this week, but I do need to put this out there. The Hill had the story. Sarah Sanders was talking to the press the other day. She says she hopes people remember her as being, quote, transparent and honest.
Transparent and honest. Yeah, that's
transparent and honest. And I said, yeah, well, I posted something about this on Facebook and somebody else thread. I said, yeah, she's transparent and that we can see right through her BS.
Right. Transparent and honest. Wow, those are not two words that will go down in her legacy.
No.
But Bob Berg was really good at what he did, and he of course went on to form his own company, Berg Muirhead, which was a very successful firm here in Detroit. It's now Van Dyke Horn. But he gave me some great advice when I was over at the land bank and dealing with this stuff. And he just said, hey, remember, he's like, when you're in the middle of all this stuff and there's people calling you off the hook and your phone is buzzing 24 hours a day, he's like, it's not you.
Right.
It's not personal.
You're the gatekeeper.
Don't get upset.
Yes.
Just know that it's not you and you'll get through it. And it really did help. It was at a time that, again,
your phone was buzzing off the hook.
Buzzing off the hook. And so, it was, and he was very helpful in that regard. And, so I felt good about knowing him. He was a good man.
Yeah. I think the most important thing to do when you're in that job is don't lie. I mean, you can You can evade occasionally. I mean, it's an art. I mean, it's not, you don't have to answer every single question that's put to you, but don't put lies out there, because that is, I mean, that's toxic. That's poison. So.
Let's move on. And I should remind folks, this is the week that was on Deadline Detroit. I'm Craig Fahle, Nancy Derringer back with me, Alan Lengel here, of course, as well. We're talking about the stories that got a lot of traffic on Deadline this week. There was another story that we had that came out of Dearborn. And, of course, Dearborn, which is home to the largest Muslim population in the United States, if I'm not mistaken.
Southeast Michigan.
Well, at least in Southeast Michigan, but it's pretty close in terms of concentration. And all that
I would
stuff.
say Middle Eastern. I mean, it's also Christian.
40% of Dearborn is Muslim
40,
now,
46, I believe. It was,
Yeah.
something like
at
that.
least.
But
Right.
you have a Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition, which, frankly, the fact that that's still happening in the first place is shocking to me.
Why is it coming out in May? I thought it came out in February when everybody was feeling wintry, and and it would be this beautiful layout with these tropical locations and these wonderful women.
I don't know.
Okay, all right.
I'm not sure. But this year they actually had a swimsuit model who is Muslim, and she was wearing a so-called burkini, as they call them. But it's just basically
full coverage.
It's as close to full coverage as you'll get in a bathing suit.
Yeah.
You know, it's not quite like the stuff they wore back in the 1800s.
Yeah,
and
but
those
it
old,
covers you down to your ankles.
Exactly.
And wrists, right?
Exactly. And so this guy who's a city employee in Dearborn makes an anti-Muslim comment on somebody's thread about this. Takes it down pretty quickly, but of course somebody screenshots it, and he said something like she should be a model for Camels R Us or something like
Right,
that, and gets in trouble for this, loses his job in the city, and now people are like, well, that's pretty harsh, but
That was a pretty dumb thing to
think,
say.
people.
Yeah,
I don't
know.
understand this. Like, think McFly.
Yeah.
It just I don't understand it, and so
The model was beautiful too. I mean, the first woman that I ever saw wearing one of those full coverage burkinis, as they call them, was Nigella Lawson, who is no more Muslim than I am, but has this creamy white, English garden complexion that she won, and she was in Australia, and it's like that's a place where the sun is like a lethal weapon, and she was just trying to keep her skin nice and white, and this girl in this picture was absolutely lovely, and I don't know why anybody cares if somebody else covers themselves.
I mean, what's interesting is that in the Trump era, where this guy has said more offensive things than any probably collectively than any president, and he, so here it is. When you see somebody being fired for that, you go, oh, wait a minute, society, we still have standards for what you can and can't say. And at the same time, you hear all this other stuff, and it's a little bit. I can see where some people are confused because Donald Trump has lowered the bar, and so people are like, what?
Yeah.
You can't say that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I think people are sort of losing a little perspective in the Trump era.
Just a tad.
Just
A little bit.
Let's move back here to Detroit for just a second. The city's got about a third of its streetlights. Remember, relighting the city of Detroit was a huge accomplishment of this administration.
Big deal.
It was a big deal to get this done with these new LEDs. However, the company that supplied most of the West Side streetlights apparently had a defect in their manufacturing process or in the design, one of the two. So a lot of the lights are either out or they're dimming to unacceptable levels. And this is a huge number of streetlights. We're talking millions of dollars in potential cost. The city is suing them.
Right.
The Public Lighting Authority, I should say, is suing them to recoup their costs for the repairs that are going to have to be done. But now this company, who's also done streetlights in places like Stockton, California, and Berkeley, California,
Another bankrupt city,
and some other cities that have redone their lights, may be facing a barrage because they're failing all over the place. The city got their lawsuit in. This company may not be long for this world. I mean, it's
sounds
like you
like a
want to be first in line.
bankruptcy is about to happen.
Well, and it could. So I mean, the city could be stuck on the hook for millions of dollars to repair these lights, and I mean,
and all the other cities too. There's no way this company's going to be able to absorb that.
Well,
unless they have some insurance.
Not at once.
Yeah,
Not
all
once.
at once.
And
Right.
so like I said, they've already been sued by Berkeley. I know Detroit has filed at this point in time. But if you're the city of Detroit, if you're a resident of Detroit, do you look at this as a failure on the part of the administration, or is this just you put your faith in the wrong company, or do you think residents will care, or are they just going to blame whoever's in charge at the time when the lights go out?
I think they'll blame whoever's in charge. I think they'll certainly care. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to tell.
Lights are a hot
who knows
issue.
what kind of due diligence was done, how the bidding process went for these lights. I mean, look, the company may have said, look, we've done this work in all these municipalities, and Detroit says, well, good enough for Berkeley, good enough for Stockton, good enough for the city of Detroit. I think we'd have to know more about what was behind it to decide whether the city's at fault.
It looks pretty clearly that this is a design failure. I mean, the company has acknowledged as much because Berkeley came out first and said, hey, and they said, yeah, our product is defective. We'll fix them all.
Yeah.
They didn't expect them to go bad everywhere, but they may have been planning for it. So, act now.
Yeah.
Act now, or else, they could be out a bunch of money. There is a little irony there. That the city of Detroit could potentially be the victim of a company going bankrupt.
You remember what the city was like before the lights came back on. It was just unbelievable.
I remember driving down Grand River. I used to go visit my father in the suburbs, and I would take Grand River all the way up. And there were just blocks and blocks of just in the middle of winter. It was just so dark.
Right.
It was kind of scary. It just looked so eerie.
Right. I mean, when we would drive through those areas, my husband would call it, "Oh, we're entering the haunted forest." And that was kind of what it was like, and it was just like, whoa.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just it was even on Cass Avenue, right in the Wayne State area.
Yeah.
And there were blocks and blocks of darkness.
Well, and I mean, it was an impressive thing to get done, but now they're going to, there was different companies that did different parts of the city. And so like the east side doesn't seem to be affected by this. The west side is where most of this is happening, but we shall see.
Formica. Yes. Okay.
All right. This was an interesting sort of story that's bubbling up here. And it's sort of this weird battle between Judge Robert Colombo, the Wayne County Sheriff's Office, and the Detroit Police, and a towing company called Nationwide Recovery. We had this on Deadline Detroit. You should take a look at this story because it's really amazing. Chief of Police James Craig came out and said, amazing how this worked, but car theft has gone down 31% in the city of Detroit since this one company was banned from doing business in the city of Detroit.
Who is the owner of that company?
I got to look it up. I will find out.
That's just so outrageous.
But
it's so...
Well, they're arguing that, we didn't have anything to do with the actual thefts, but one of the things that showed up in the lawsuit that the city brought against this company was that, one of their employees, or like 700 text messages or something between a guy who was part of a known car theft ring and this guy who happened to be on one of the recovery crews from this towing company.
Huh.
And so what they're alleging happened is that these guys were getting tipped off where they were dumping the stolen cars. They'd steal them. They'd tip the company off. The company could then tow the car to the yard, leave it there for a few days to rot, and then notify the people whose car was stolen that, oh, by the way, we have your car. It's been here for 6 days. You owe us this much money. And so they could pad their bottom line. This is what's alleged here.
Yeah.
And the thing is, they were calling people sometimes before the car had even been reported stolen, which tells you that something's going on.
I think one of the big questions is, what about the Detroit police? I mean, somebody had to know what was going on. I mean, you can't be that blind.
But Detroit
to that
police
many cars.
were complaining that their investigations into these car thefts were being impeded because a couple guys at the Wayne County Sheriff's Department were the ones that were handling the police side of things after these thefts for this towing company.
Something was going on
the Detroit
the law
police,
enforcement.
Colombo saying, look, you're impeding an investigation by getting this, having these cars removed before this happens. And so they're arguing... They're arguing that this was being done before the police even had a chance to deal with it, and Chief Craig is saying, "Coinkydink? I don't think so. I mean, again, a 31% decline in car theft since this happened.
That's insane.
And the public corruption is a bad thing always, but." Towing companies. There's so many scandals that we've had involving towing companies in recent years.
I was going to say it's like there are certain businesses that you just know are dirty right down to the lug nuts on those trucks, and I think towing might be one of them. I mean, you like to think that
I mean, there are legitimate towing.
Yeah, there have to be.
But there
must
are certainly
be.
crooked ones that are going to the lots before the allotted time. 2-hour parking or whatever, and they're going in and stealing them. At, at
I'm
45
sorry
minutes
I'm sorry The Sopranos is off the air now, because I could see an entire season arc of
on the towing.
Christopher gets into the towing
or
business.
The Wire even.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
Well, it's one of those things though that is frustrating. And let's end with this today, because it has not necessarily been a very good week or couple of weeks or couple of months for Mayor Duggan in terms of what's going on. He's under the microscope right now. The Free Press is definitely going after him on this relationship between himself, this alleged relationship between himself and Dr. Hassan, this Make Your Date program, the way the nonprofit has been set up. It's a very sort of confusing situation. And of course, then in the middle of all this, his wife files for divorce. Not a good time, I'm guessing.
I like the idea that we're talking about a potential affair here in an organization called Make Your Date.
Save it for Monday.
Yes, it seems interesting there. I just wonder in the end, I mean, I think we have to look at how legitimate is it to have used this organization, which it seems it is. Then the question is, could there have been a better organization to use? I mean, she seems to be an expert in the field there. I don't know.
She's like the expert in the field.
Yeah. This is to prevent preterm delivery, which people should know, premature births.
Well, I mean,
which is a real problem in the city.
Right.
It is a real problem.
And we had one of the worst. Was it in the world or
in the Detroit's situation was rivaling third world countries when it comes in terms of the rates of preterm births.
Right.
And when you look at what happens when children are born premature, and there's a lot of hurdles that they have to jump over to catch up, and sometimes they don't. My son was 8 weeks premature when he was born, and it put a lot of things in his way. We were fortunate that we had good healthcare coverage.
Right.
And we were able to get him the care that he needed to overcome a lot of this stuff, but it doesn't happen that way for a lot of folks.
No, it certainly doesn't.
And so the goal is laudable, but at the same time, if this was done in any way to,
I have to confess, I found that story
problem
in the Free Press so confusing. It was really difficult for me to understand what was the problem here, that it was whether it was administered by Wayne State or whether it was registered as a nonprofit somewhere else. I'm really having a hard time wrapping my head around what potentially may be wrong about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's
other than the fact that
the issue really is, did he show favoritism? It doesn't really matter. I mean, they're trying to parse everything into whether it was a nonprofit, whether the money went directly to the nonprofit or was administered by Wayne, and it appears to be part of Wayne State
either.
Right. And I think it's the issue is whether he showed favoritism or not, and in the end, it's like, hey, he happened to know somebody who happened to be an expert in the area, who happened to be, potentially having an affair with. But in the end, it's like, I don't know. I have a hard time getting really excited about that. Nobody profited personally by that. It wasn't like she was pocketing. It wasn't like her salary was dependent on this money coming in. And so...
Well, and that's what they're going to look at. But, again, getting people to read the story as it continues on seems to be the goal here. And I mean, obviously that makes sense. But, yeah, that one was a weird... I almost wish that they would have waited a couple of weeks till they had a little bit more information and could put it in better context.
Well, right. I mean, it needed a clear, what we call a nut graph, explaining why we should care. Exactly.
What question are you trying to get answered here?
Right.
I mean, did the city lose out on money on this? Did it? I mean, it sounds like it was a necessary program for it to address a serious issue.
And did money get
city.
steered towards somebody that the mayor had a relationship with that she should not have gotten? I mean, that's what they're trying to find.
But she's the expert. So
I know. And
I think they're going to be hard pressed to really find something so egregious.
But the timing of the divorce and all that sort of stuff, and the banners with Carmack and everything else now has people wondering, and that just sort of raises the question mark for a lot of folks. So
it puts a lot of smoke in the air. I mean, a very cynical part of me thinks the only reason for this story was to introduce her name into the public record, because most of the legit news organizations, when they wrote about the Carmack stuff, did not bring her name into it. But now it's out there. So.
All right.
And it's no longer an affair once you're separated, I think. I don't know. Maybe you're just a girlfriend. It doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, at this,
we don't
at
know
this
what's
point in
going on.
time.
Who cares?
The status changes.
There's one.
Gets cleaned up a little bit.
One person whose extracurricular activities I don't even want to think about is probably Mayor Duggan, but that's okay.
We'll end it right
or
there.
Or maybe you two. I don't know. We'll
yeah. Nobody wants to know about mine, that's for sure. Mostly because they're non-existent. But that's it. That's the week that was on Deadline Detroit. And lots of other stories that were there as well. A couple of columns I think people should check out. I mean, Charlie LaDuff's got a couple of pieces up there this week that are interesting to me that I think you'll like. And, of course, I'm doing the podcast every day here. You can find it here at Deadline Detroit. And I always like the Zip, which will be done a little bit later on today, and some other things.
All right.
And, of course, on Monday, we'll be back with the Monday Follies, just like this. So thanks for being here. Alan Langle, Nancy Derringer, appreciate your time. Again, check out DeadlineDetroit.com. Thanks for watching today. Thanks to Michael Lucido for engineering the broadcast. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody.